Climate anxiety is becoming a major issue, especially with young people. They're born into the problem. So its mindset is very different. Climate change is kind of like a flood coming, and we need to prepare ourselves first, thinking of ways to mitigate plus adapt. I think the moment young people begin to take action, the anxiety is still there. At least it's getting channeled.
Hi, Tarini. Welcome to Shiko.
Hi Shreya.
Tarini, could you share a bit more about yourself?
So I am an environmental consultant, ESG consultant, and I have been a professor of environmental law. I'm also a lawyer by training, and we also have a center where we run courses on ESG and environmental law and legal courses for young lawyers. So a couple of different hats.
Tarini, you've built a career at the crossroads, as you said, that you're a lawyer. You've studied environmental law, so sustainability and impact, long before when ESG became a buzzword. So what drew you into this place for the very first time? And what sort of keeping you going all these years that you've been practicing?
So for me, doing something which I know or which I realize or I can see is making a difference is very important. So that's one of the things which has moved me towards the space in which I am right now. And this whole journey actually started for me with human rights. So in college, way back decades ago, I was involved in social movements and human rights movements and that kind of thing. And then I that led me towards understanding and working with refugees. So I think it was perhaps a journey that my life had to take. So I worked with refugees actually in the UK as well when I was studying, doing my law degree. And I would see their pain and I would see their difficulties, especially, being asylum seekers, the kind of situation that they escape from, and then suffering and not getting refugee status, and, all the challenges refugees face. When I came back to India, then I worked with refugees in India as well as environmental refugees. So, environmental refugees coming in from Bangladesh to India. And of course, as you know, there is no legal definition of environmental refugees under international law. So, technically there's no such thing under international law as an environmental refugee. So we would try to get them protection under other by calling them or by seeing if they can be classified as a political refugee, etc. But again, and some of them were in prison. So we would visit them in prison and seeing this and their stories, their difficulties. So I remember, for instance, one of the refugees who was in prison, Bangladeshi. And when we interviewed him and we asked him, why have you escaped? Why have you come into India? Of course, a lot of them come into India because they have family connections. They have connections. Of course, we have connections with Bangladesh, and India has strong connections. And, but then he talked about, the police would beat him, things like that. But then when we delved more into it, it came out that because of sea level rise, his farmland, his, land had actually been swept away, which had led him to have to move towards Dhaka. And then there he had faced further persecution, and then he had come to India. So actually, he's an environmental refugee. But there is no such thing as environmental refugee, so we had to try and get him protection as a political refugee, facing discrimination and so on in his country. So those stories made me take more of an interest in environmental law and climate change particularly. That, what can we do to actually try to help prevent these kinds of exodus which is going to happen as a result of climate change. And when you look at the kind of impact that climate change is going to have, there are going to be millions of refugees, internally displaced people in the coming decades. And these people are at this point or this sort of status under law where they could possibly not get protection, or they'll be at the mercy of the host country. It depends on if that country accepts them or not. So it's a very sad, I would say, situation to be in. I mean, if you try and imagine being in a situation where you lose your country, you lose your identity, you lose your family, and now you're at the mercy of a government which may or may not take you in, and even if it does, it might just leave you languishing in a camp somewhere. So I just feel we have to do something to, of course, help these people, but also to sort of to make sure that we don't have millions of people becoming refugees, environmental refugees. So, and the only way to do that is to try to mitigate climate change, try to put in place adaptation policies for climate change. And then the only way to do that is actually if all segments of society work together, so companies, government, civil society, individual people, everybody has to work together, then perhaps we'll be able to move the needle a little bit. So that's what motivates me, these people, and the thought of more people like them, and also knowing that through ESG, through environmental law, so that became my tool, I will be able to make a difference. A difference might be made slowly, but it will be a difference because it's ESG and environmental law and law are strong tools that can be used to, ensure that companies, governments, others actually put in place sustainability measures, actually reduce their GHG emissions. I think that's what motivates me and keeps me going.
Tarini, you talk about, and what I've heard from these stories and your experience has been, is doing the right thing and not just necessarily hopping off a trend of what's going on within law as well. What does real responsibility look like, especially when a lot of companies and even the big companies? So you also mentioned about the importance of top down and bottom up approach, right? So companies play a huge role in policy making. So when a lot of companies are trying to look green or greenwashing instead of genuinely being green, what does real responsibility look like?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the core of the question is responsibility. And when we look at the word responsibility, I mean, you can kind of think of it like a circle. So for a lot of people, the responsibility is basically about themselves, so that's a tiny circle. Then yourself and your family, that becomes a slightly bigger circle. But actually, when we think about it, we have a responsibility to the community we live in, so that's a slightly bigger circle. We also have a responsibility to society at large, right? So that's a much bigger circle. But then actually, the responsibility doesn't end there. So the responsibility that we have also expands down to future generations. We have a responsibility to the generations that are going to come, which is like a really big circle. So when you look at it from that point of view, you realize that actually, when we are working or doing anything that has an positive impact on the environment or on climate change, we are doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for our communities, society at large, but we're also doing it for this really big circle, the future generations. And that is something which, I mean, it's a no-brainer, I would say. A lot of people find the concept perhaps a little bit abstract, that because you're thinking 100 years and 200 years down the line. But when you actually realize that that 100 years and 200 years down the line are actually your own family, right? It's your children, their children, their children, their children. You realize that this is actually like a web, like as they say, that, that we're everything is a web, everything is interconnected, nature, environment, us. So doing the right thing is basically about, ensuring that yourself, your family, and the future generations are left, especially the future generations, at least are in as good a position, let's say, as we are currently, which is already not a very good position, but let's say at least that much, if not a better position. But what we are doing right now is that we are making things worse. So 50 years and 100 years down the line, the people that are going to be alive, they're going to be facing and they're going to be coping with the results of the climate change that us and the generations before us have caused. And that's not fair. So they had nothing to do with it. They didn't create it, but they're going to be dealing with it. So droughts and floods and of course heat waves and global warming, all sorts of climatic changes that are taking place, that's going to be their reality. The things which we talk about now and we discuss it and it's all very interesting, that is going to be their reality. So is it fair that that's the world that we are leaving for them? So I think responsibility or doing the right thing is just it's just about that. It's about understanding our own place, understanding that in a sense one could say that we are, as there's this Native American saying, right, that we hold the earth, we hold the natural resources in trust. We don't own anything. We hold it in trust, and we hold it in trust for future generations. There's a saying which says that, we have actually borrowed, in a sense, the earth and natural resources from the future. So when we think of it from this end, and that it's just so simple. That's just what we should all be doing. And now, of course, the next thing that comes in, next question people will ask is that I'm just one person, or perhaps, I mean, different people are in different positions, different types of work, so not everyone may feel that they can make a direct impact, but actually each of us can. Just imagine if every person was to do their own little bit to save water. Things like which are, we teach kids in school, close the tap when you're brushing your teeth. They seem small, but actually, if everybody did that, imagine the amount of water that would be saved. Or if everybody switched off lights when they're not sitting in a room. It seems so small, but actually, if it became a part of our sort of global, national culture, like our city's culture, then just imagine the amount of electricity that would be saved, which means the amount of GHG emissions that would be cut, right? So it's little things. Each of us can do those little things, and by doing that, we are doing what our responsibility. That it's a simple thing.
Every drop counts, as you rightly said.
Exactly.
From the center standpoint, Tarini, if you could share how is it that you work with companies, and how is it that you are educating the individuals to be more climate conscious?
So our attempt at there's two lines of work. One is the courses that we have, and one is of course the consultancy. So from the point of view of the courses, our aim is to have courses which provide the students not just the theoretical understanding but also practical application, and we have internationally acclaimed faculty so that they're able to learn from the best, and they're able to sort of make it something which at the end of the course they can go out and they can actually implement what they've learned. Because as an academic myself and as a former professor, I know how a lot of courses are designed to be, I mean, amazing on paper. It's great, it's good to learn the theory, but then at the end of it, a lot of the times when people actually go into the workspace, they're not able to actually implement it, right? Because theory and practice are two different things. So that's what I'm trying to do, bridge that gap. And this is very important, particularly in the ESG space, where you need to be able to understand the concepts of net zero and GHG emissions, but then you should also be able to actually implement those concepts when, as a consultant, when you're advising a company. So that is our attempt in with the courses. And with the consultancy side of things, my, I would say, philosophy or my approach is to give companies a completely, I would say, unbiased picture, a completely unbiased, consulting by which they are able to take the right decisions. And why I'm saying this is because there are a lot of consultants out there who perhaps just to, is easier, or perhaps they just want to go along with what the client has said. They don't always give the correct picture, whether it be in terms of the regulations or whether it be in terms of impacts, and that ultimately is going to affect the company. It could lead to litigation risks, it could lead to actual impacts, because of climate risks. So our main focus is to provide a completely unbiased, completely thorough, complete, full picture, by which then we give our advice that these are the steps, measures you can take depending on the nature of the consultancy. This is what you can do to reduce your GHG emissions, or this is, or even to try and push companies a little bit more. So there can be two standpoints to anything. Let's say a company comes in and talks about reducing GHG emissions. So, one approach can be just to say, okay, put solar panels, and then you'll have a 1 or 2% reduction, and that's a safe thing. It looks good. You can get your photo ops and blah blah blah. But there can be much more that that company could be doing. So as consultants, it's our job to present that full picture, not just tell them what is easy, not just tell them what we think they'd want to hear, because that's the low hanging fruit, but actually push them and put all that. Now, what they implement or not implement is up to them. But in my experience, most of the people that I have worked with, they actually appreciate this, because somewhere along the line they do want a consultant who is going to be very honest, straightforward with them, who they know that okay, we can trust what they're saying, because what they're saying is going to be very thought out. It's coming as very expert advice based on a complete understanding of our situation. So that is my approach with consulting. And I mean, I'm happy to say that some like quite a good number of our clients actually then do implement a lot of the measures, or they bring it into their plans, and then they report back to me and they say that, actually this was a really good thing. When you told us, we thought, oh, this is too much, it's going to cost too much, but actually now we realize that, this is a really good idea, and we're getting good feedback from investors, we're getting good feedback from customers. It actually works out as a win-win.
Tarini, when you speak about working with your clients, are they from a specific industry and are they based only in India?
No, so we have clients from around the world. We have clients from EU. We have clients from India as well, and we have so different industries. We have some oil and gas companies. We have some mining companies. So different industries and different sort of issues and challenges that each of them faces when they're trying to transition towards sustainability and net zero.
Understand. So, with your long journey and your relationship with sustainability, you've trained, you've taught, and you've also worked with people, as you said, across different industries and across different countries. What is one thing that you've learned in your journey that gets people to truly care? What is that mindset shift that really helps them to see from a different perspective?
So I would say now, in the context of climate change, because the problem is so sort of big, and I mean, I think I wouldn't say abstract, but I think it's just so big that sometimes it's like you can't wrap your head around it. It's like you're talking about this much level and sea level rise, and 50 years later this, and 100 years later this, and you're talking about these big numbers and these time scales, and then the kinds of impacts. And then, of course, there's different scientific opinion about whether this impact will happen here or here at this point, or, so all that. So it's just so big that sometimes I think that makes people kind of tune off emotionally from
Hmm.
it. And I think till you don't feel for something, you're not going to be motivated to actually do something about it, So it seems like, it's something, it's out there, the government should do it. It's like, it's something separate from me. Whereas the moment you're able to personalize it, the moment you're able to make people realize that this is a personal problem, this is not a big huge global leader, some problem, some cop out there, this is like about you and me and your family and your children, then that makes people motivated to be like, okay, but then what can I do about it? Then what happens sometimes is sometimes people feel powerless. They say that, okay, but you're telling me that, obviously it's me, it's my children, it's my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, what can I do if America is not doing something, and China is not, and India is not? Then you have to kind of be like, yes, America and China and India may or may not and whatever, but ultimately we are the citizens of America and China and India, right? And we are citizens of the city we live in, and the country we live in, and the state we live in, and this world. So we have power, each individual has power, right? So we have the power. Once you want to do something, then you have the power. You'll think of ways by which you could perhaps try to push your government, or just implement something in your community, or even just you and your family. Just like start small. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to now become this Greta Thunberg number two, right? It's do something small, start small, see the impact, maybe then set up a little group in your colony and be like, okay, we're going to plant more trees. You may think that planting more trees is like so big deal, but it makes a difference. Those trees, it's like it's a carbon sink, plus it helps in terms of heat, and it makes a difference, right? Now maybe then you make that a little bit bigger, you collaborate with the next neighborhood. I mean, little things. So I think the moment you personalize it, that's what I found. And then when it comes to companies also, yes, a lot of the times, obviously, CEOs and directors and so on, their focus is on profits, which makes sense. They're running a company, their focus will be on profits. But again, the moment you personalize it and you say, you bring in how their profits are going to be impacted by XYZ climate risk. Let's say they have a facility in a particular location which is going to become more flood prone, or if they get certain raw materials from somewhere where, because of droughts in the next 10-15 years, that those raw materials are not going to be available there from there. So that means supply chains are going to be impacted. The moment they realize that, so again, you personalize it to their company, their issue, then they start to be like, oh, okay, this is impacting me. So now then the next thing is, now what can I do about it? So of course you have to adapt. So maybe you need to change your supply chain. Maybe you need to, move your facility from there. Or you need to adapt, put in place some adaptation measures. But then ultimately the real thing you need to do is work together with every other corporate and government in the world to try to mitigate and limit climate change, limit the temperature rise. So then again, once they realize that this is a personal, this I'm going to be impacted, my company, me, my family, then people so are more motivated to do things. So I think that, and it's more important. I think even with something like climate change, it's even more important because it's just so big that start thinking in terms of this and this is the chart and this is how the climate is. But the moment it's about you and me and our lives, then it becomes real. So we have to make it real basically for people. And it is real. It's not even that we're making it real. It is real. You just have to kind of like present the information and then people go, oh, yeah, this is real.
Looking at it from a way that, from a problem solving way versus I'm so climate anxious way. And
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
something that
yeah,
is, that's so common. And as you said, that it's so easy to get overwhelmed
yeah,
when we read the news, when we see things around it, and even year on year when we see the climatic impacts and how it's changing. But it's also seeing that we hold the power to make that change
yeah, yeah.
is what
I
I
think,
noticed.
yeah, climate anxiety is becoming a major issue, especially with young people. A lot of young people, because again, and then it's understandable, right? They're born into the problem. So for us, we're kind of like we've grown, and then the problem has come up. So its mindset is very different from young people who are born, and then they're hearing it and they're seeing it, and so that is a major issue. But I think again, the way to deal with that is, on the one hand, if someone actually has serious anxiety over climate change, then they need to get the help that they require for that. Perhaps they need to speak to someone, maybe a counselor, maybe a group. So that is required, but also take some action.
Hmm.
So I think the moment young people begin to take action, the anxiety is still there, but at least it's getting channeled. At least,
Hmm.
they're feeling that, okay, I'm not just this helpless. Because anxiety comes from feeling helpless. That, like, there's this problem coming, there's this big, flood coming my way, and what do I do? And anyone would be anxious. I mean, if you just imagine it, if you're sitting somewhere and you're told in 2 days there's going to be a flood, and there's nothing you can do about it, anybody would get anxious. But if you are told in 2 days there's a flood coming, these are the things you can do. Perhaps you can build this boat, you can do this, whatever. So then the anxiety gets channeled into, okay, finding a solution, gathering people around you, making this thing happen so that you can save yourselves or protect or mitigate the impacts of that particular action. So in a sense, climate change is kind of like a flood coming, right? And we need to prepare ourselves first. So the more we start thinking like that, preparing ourselves, thinking of ways to mitigate plus adapt, then we'll be able to cope and deal with the problem better.
Tarini, for anyone who's listening and who wants to get into impact, but they're a bit resistant because they're thinking that impact means that it can't be profitable. What is one thing that you've experienced, given you run a consulting company, you run a consulting center, you run an education center, you've taught in schools as well. What is one thing that you would tell these people who have this dilemma?
So I would say there are, if you're looking at it from a careers point of view, there are different career pathways. There is, of course, the pathway which a lot of people adopt, which is also a very good pathway, which is pure social work, or working in an NGO, social activism, where you're just not interested in the money, you just have enough for your survival, let's say. And that's also very important, and those people really need to be admired and respected for what they're doing, because in a sense they're upholding a certain value, that certain things are just not about money, it's about doing the right thing, as you said earlier. But then there is also career pathways where you can do the right thing and also make money, and that's also fine. So I think the first thing that comes in with the whole environment or human rights or any of the sustainability is this kind of what judgment, I would say, that comes in, that, oh, if you're environment, one is obviously, oh, you won't earn so much money, but the
Hmm.
other side is that you should not even want to earn so much money. You should not even be thinking of money, and that judgment, I think, become the problem then, because people, either it sort of puts people off, or it makes people who are wanting to earn money, makes them feel guilty. Maybe they'll sort of like go in another thing and be like, okay, what I'll do is I'll get a job in this other sector and I'll do this on the side because I'm a good environmentalist. But I don't think there needs to be any any judgment about things like that, because we need to live. Everybody needs to live. Everyone has a right to live a good life. You are using your skills and you have a right to be rewarded for that. So that's perfectly fine. And then the career pathways that can be adopted in order to make the money that you want, have the lifestyle you want, can be perhaps in the line of, for instance, consulting, where you work with companies and you charge them your legitimate consultancy fee. But the consultancy you give them is ethical, it's, thorough. So there you don't compromise. I think the problem comes in then when, and that's also, again, it's a reason why this whole debate, comes in and people started judging, because there are consultants out there who, just for the sake of making money, give, I would say, wrong advice to companies. Maybe they just toe the line. Maybe, for instance, in environmental impact assessments, this happens very often, where you have EIs being very badly drafted, major impacts being, not mentioned in EIA reports, and this is deliberately done by the consultant just so that the company will get the environmental clearance. So that's unethical. That's a line that should not be crossed. For the sake of money, you are now actually harming the environment, and it's unethical. But you can be an EI consultant. You can give a very complete and thorough and ethical report, and you can tell the company directly that these are the environmental impacts, this is the wildlife, this is the biodiversity, and this is what I feel that you should not set up your industry here, or you should set up your industry but make with the following changes in the size or in the whatever the area, or etc., etc. Right? So you can give them the correct advice, and you can charge for that advice, but you are not doing something unethical. So I think that's the way in which, in this sustainability impact sphere, one can earn money, because you're earning the money because you're a professional and you're giving your advice as a professional, as somebody who has studied a particular area. You are an expert in that, you have your skills, but you're giving ethical advice. And I think if consultants do that, even lawyers, for instance, right? So as a lawyer or as a consultant, or in the, whether it be the ESG space, whether it be, any other space, if you do that, for instance, social consulting, where, maybe a company comes to you and asks you about their labor policies, right? Now you have two options in front of you. You can either toe the line, the company tells you that we only want to pay, even we don't even want to pay the minimum wage, we want to pay even below the minimum wage, right? But we want to make sure that we don't get into trouble, right? Now there could be one consultant who will say, okay, and some sort of loopholes, present some loopholes to them, or write a report that falsely says that they are adhering to certain norms when they're not. And I mean, that's greenwashing, but and also ultimately the company can get into trouble. So that's not right. At some point, if somebody finds out, there could be a litigation, right? Because they're breaking certain norms. Or there could be a consultant that says, no, you can't do that, right? Whether they'll want to hear it or not, you'll tell them, my expert opinion is that the law says this, you have to give the minimum wage, this is the working hours, you can't exceed that, this is the kind of working conditions you have to give your employees, this is the number of holidays, this is the maternity leave, this is the etc., etc., that you have to put in place. And if you want, I can put in place a policy for you for that, and I advise you to do that, because otherwise you could face litigation tomorrow. You could face reputational risk. Consumer groups get to know, or if tomorrow it could come out in the media, as it has often, right? That with these sweatshops and big the fashion houses and etc., with their sweatshops in Bangladesh and etc., it comes out, right? And then that impacts their reputation. That impacts that's bad PR, and that means you are actually, in a sense of, you're not doing the right thing by the company either, because in the moment you're telling them what they want to hear, but ultimately you're exposing them to more risks, which is not your job as a consultant. So you can charge your fees, but tell them the right thing. So I think that's how one can earn a good living, have a good lifestyle, but have that lifestyle and that money and everything ethically. And at the end of the day, you're making a positive difference, because let's say out of 100 clients, if even 90 put in place the measure that you have recommended, right? And whether they like it or not, but they think about it and they do, okay, this makes sense, you've made a difference, right? Whereas if you had not given them that advice, then we're at the status quo, or we're even below that. So that's, and we're trying to kind of move forward. That's our aim in this whole thing. The aim is moving forward, climate change mitigation, trying to make sure that the temperature rise somehow perhaps doesn't cross 2 degrees at least. We're nowhere near. I mean, we're not going to be able to reach the 1.5 degree target. Let's at least try and stay at 2 degrees. That also seems very unlikely now, but perhaps we can still do it. That's the aim.
I'm very hopeful too. Thank you, Tarini, for sharing, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.